Good afternoon, and thank you to everybody who's joined us. My name is Chris Lavoisier. I'm the CEO and founder of We Know Training. I'm here in our Toronto office today, and super excited to both introduce our guest and introduce a topic that I think is probably one of the most interesting conversations, ideas, and probably one of the most impactful things that's going to happen in our industry and all walks of life in the next little while. So without further ado, we'll get started, and I'd like to introduce Dan. So Dan, tell us about yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Chris, pleasure being here today with you, and obviously you guys being a partner of Credivera. My name is Dan Driscoll. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Credivera. We're a technology company with headquarters in Calgary and Toronto, and basically changing the world of digital identity through verifiable credentials.
Good stuff. Well, it's a topic that I've dived deep down a rabbit hole of and learning a lot about. And hopefully, it will help people relearn some of this today. But I think it's a conversation that's just started in the world. But I want to start by introducing our partnership. So for We Know Training customers, those who use our platform, the training managers that buy training content from some of our brands like Danatrek and Relo and various properties. Digital credentials have been an issue from day one. So it was digital badges. Before that, it was PDF wallet cards, and before that, it was wall certificates. And at the end of the day, this conversation is largely about that and everything that stands behind that. So we do have a partnership with Credivera. We launched it officially. We were down in Nashville at the American Society of Association Executives Conference Exposition. A very large show, lots of North American-wide large organization associations and credentialing bodies, regulatory agencies. We have released a white paper, so for those who haven't had a chance to read this, I encourage. It's really filled with some really detailed information about our partnership with Credivera and how it benefits our partners. But I want to talk today about kind of more conversation about why this matters. So I'll share a story that I can reflect on in terms of ultimately why this matters to us is the proliferation or movement of training online is well known and understood now. It's probably a 20-year thing. We have stuff that requires assessment and testing, and there's been a framework for proctoring exams both in person and obviously what really extraordinarily exploded over COVID was the virtual proctoring of exams. But it's always left a hole in my mind in terms of high stakes training. So we have 300 websites in our ecosystem of partner websites that we operate for our partners that might be government or regulators or associations. We have our own brands, and all that training is in an area of what I'd call training that matters, regulated high stakes training. And a lot of that training is moving online. It used to be classroom based, and so the immediate problem that we have to solve for is proof of person's attendance, their identity, and ultimately, obviously, competency. The other problem that I think I'll share a story about how industry tried to solve the problem and it failed. And I think this is an interesting parallel to launch off to how you think you're going to solve this. So in around 2012 or 13 in Alberta, all of the industry safety associations came together under a banner called HSAN, which I think stood for Health and Safety Association Network. So it would be your Alberta Construction Safety Association, your NFORM, Oil Sands Safety Association, Electrical Contractors or Electrical Safety Association. So they all came together because at that time, there was an extraordinary need for talent in the market. And the cost of training that talent on a job site to go work at, say, Suncor's property, and then that person would quit, and then they'd go across the week, to Shell's property, and the cost of retraining, training, providing proof and evidence of training that was monumental, and the cost to the economic cost, just in terms of switching cost and productivity and friction in terms of labor and talent attraction was a major problem. So these associations come together. They create this other association that was going to just track centrally all of a person's training. And this is in an Alberta context, only related to those industries. So you can already see some of the problems. And it eventually failed because nobody really wanted to take responsibility for ownership of that information. It was really about another database with people in it, a centralized database that privacy, security, proof was all very hard to capture. the goal, which was the ability for an individual to have their training record from all aspects and walks of life in one place, was an extraordinary goal. You could see the evidence of why it would help industry and why it helps society, but it failed. So I know now enough about Credivera that I have never been more excited about a technology and the impact of what's driving your solution. But maybe in your own words, you could tell us, what is Credivera? How did it solve, or how would it solve that problem?
That's a really good question. So if you look at our background as executives and founders in the company, we come from a supply chain background. So we've spent a lot of time in field operations. We've spent a lot of time in places like e-invoicing, and some of us in the earliest days of building what was called a digital wallet that ultimately ended up being used online for future transactions. This is in the early 2000s. Now, what's really interesting behind this is we got a chance to be the ones, as we were implementing our other software solutions in the energy space, we were the ones that used to go to somebody's job site and get these credentials. I'd get to WIMIS to be able to access Suncor's job site or Shell's job site at a refinery or at a physical well site location. And during that process, we realized that a lot of these credentials are just paper, right? There's no proof to it that says you are the holder of that credential, or you earned it, or it wasn't in a credential mill produced and issued to you for payment, right? So what we saw as Credivera is a massive change in the world of digital identity. It started off with 2018 and 19 in Europe with the launch of GDPR, which is basically the ability for an individual to ultimately have the right to be forgotten and own their identity. We saw California, the state of California in the US, launch that within 3 months, a replica of GDPR in Europe, which, if you now think about the concentration of technology companies that are identity-based technology companies, right, from Facebook, Meta, Google, Apple, everybody's is in Silicon Valley, which is in California. So now all of a sudden, everybody had to adhere to these new standards of digital identity. And then in Canada, we're looking at basically reshuffling our processes around IPEDA and the act of owning our own information to now being looked at it being changed by Bill C-27, which is the Charter Rights of Digital Identity of Canadians and Canadian businesses. So all of those components kind of came together over the last 4 or 5 years here in creating a new way in which people have to think about ownership of an identity and how a business owns somebody else's identity as well. So when you talk about the failed effect of 2012 and 13, where an organization was thus going to own all Albertan workers' identity, it's something that would have never really worked. As much as it was a great dream, nobody ever was going to be able to take it on themselves because they now had the ownership of a digital identity of an individual. So for us at Credivera, what we wanted to do is we wanted to create basically a solution where an individual would own what's called a digital identity wallet or worker identity wallet, where they can present their credential certifications, competencies, or their association designations in one common place. However, the individual actually owns that information, while they're then able to share that information out with their employers or prospecting employers to say, via selective disclosure, here's what you have asked to know about me for you to make a decision whether I'm the right candidate or not. But if you chose to not bring me in because I'm not the right candidate ultimately, I can revoke access of that data from you. And what it leaves the organization with is zero toxic data in their emails, in their data centers, because you no longer have access to my personal information if you and I chose to not do business together. So this became quite an important aspect of how people can have a portable digital identity that they can truly own. They can choose who they want to share it with, for how long, and then ultimately when they can revoke that information back. So we're moving into this new world where those that are issuing that information now have the ability to control that communication between themselves and the holder.
So I'm an issuer. In many cases, I guess we would call Danatech an issuer, or we'd call Rello an issuer, or our partners. We serve the alcohol training for the BC government. They would be an issuer on our platform.
Correct.
But you're not just a digital wallet provider, right? So there's a software behind your business that, our customers, people that buy training from us, can use to manage their compliance framework, or is that?
That's exactly it. And the best way to describe it is we created a workforce management tool where the employer can, or in your case, the customer, can ensure that they can create an identity profile or a worker profile, where they say, in order for this individual to work for me, and whether they're the controller in a company, whether they're the pipe fitter that's physically in field operation, or whether they're the truck driver, doesn't really matter. The worker profile is set in the system that says, these are contractually what you agreed to keep in good standing as the individual. So us as an organization can meet regulatory compliances. So an organization comes into our system and uses that profile builder to allow for the individual to create their profile as to who they are, what they should be able to do, issue that via the digital wallet, and now it's the responsibility of the individual to upload their credentials, to be able to prove that they are who they say they are, and that they can do the job they can do. So for us, when we start looking at the you are who you say you are aspect of the business, we've partnered with major background screening organizations. So we have partnerships with Mint, Sterling Backcheck, and now recently working on a partnership with Certain. So these are predominantly across Canada, the three largest back screening organizations that also have quite deep presences in the US and across Europe as well. So now we can truly create the identity of an individual and verify through a trusted partner. So somebody that verifies at RCMP or at a DMV level. But that then ultimately creates that identity profile of the individual.
So your customers are essentially, and I'm going to put it in plain language because we can get too deep into the technology here. And I do want to talk about that in a second, but they essentially customize the roles in the organization around roles, titles, competency profiles. But it's not just competency in a training perspective anymore. Compliance, it's more of a compliance framework management system in that, there might be a background check required, there might be a driver's abstract required, there might be a pre-employment drug test, all forms of different ways to ensure that someone meets the standard to practice whatever it is that they do. And so we're a training company. We're an issuer of training credentials. I'm excited to be your first major training partner because I think that these things go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question that, a lot of people kind of get lost in is I used to have a digital badge and I could issue a digital badge. And we have a wallet, so I can help you, the We Know Training wallet is, all of the credentials that individual has received from us as an issuer.
Yeah.
But of course, the problem with that is it's no longer, it doesn't survive in an ecosystem. So it can't include all these other things. Can you try to describe the technology at play here and a little bit about what's an issuer, what's a holder, what's a verifier, and why is it different now? And maybe where does blockchain fit into this?
That's a very good question. So from a technology aspect, we as an organization, we've been very passionate about distributed ledger technologies and the power that they were to yield in the future. So we started looking at this technology. We started following it around 2016 and developing in it in 2017. And ultimately, what people need to understand about blockchain or distributed ledger technology is, first of all, it's not just crypto. I want to be very clear. Bitcoin is just a product that's built on a blockchain platform, but it fundamentally comes down to being a Java or a C++ based technology that was written by a set of coders to create a new value proposition, which is this concept of immutability, irrefutability of data, and we hear this word ledger a lot used in this technology. And really, the ledger framework just says we've removed the fundamental concept of delete. So you can only append to the data. So if you remove delete and you can only append, that means that we can always see the information at any one of its stages before it got appended to. And it means that all of us have to agree that the information now needs to be appended with the new data set and the new data set and the new data set. But this creates a single source of truth, which is what is very, very much popular about blockchain as a technology.
I think that was my favorite way to explain this when we last met here. you're coining it the single source of truth system.
Yeah.
And that's the missing link that we haven't been able to provide, to industry. So, if we have a 16-year-old who's just taken the hunter education course on our platform for one of our partners. Now they're technically licensed to hunt. They can put a firearm in their hands. They can walk around in the woods with that firearm. And I think the proliferation of fraud, and intended and otherwise, like I think Canadians would totally get the voting license example because I think it raced out so quickly and there's no controls. And so, people were taking the voting license for everybody in the area around the lake and the cottage. One person would take the course for 10 people. And of course, we serve regulated industries. So, we deal with people who are getting licenses to practice. We deal with, health and safety related content that is critical, life and death. And learner fraud is a real problem that we're trying to solve for. And it really is about that credential. And so I find it interesting. And I think that, now is it fair to say that now my wallet is trading in decentralized real-time information based on a ledger that is is it real time? Is it live? Like, is that, like you talked about the power for an individual to revoke their personal information. So I get that. I've left. I used to work at McDonald's. Now I work at, Tim Hortons, and I revoke my record from my employer. So I certainly understand that from a privacy perspective. But in terms of industry and how they use this information and stuff like that, is it truly real time?
It is real time. And the reason why it's real time is because you've built these hooks that exist between the moment something gets created or issued, right? So think of Danatech issuing a TDG license or certificate to an individual. The moment that you've issued that, you've created an instance of it that's now connected to the individual's identity and wallet. So if, let's say, at some point in time you found out through, say, Learn or Verify that the individual swapped himself midway through a course, and he's no longer the individual that actually completed that course, and you wanted to revoke the good standing license of that individual, now you can do that in your system, in your Learn or Verified system. You can change the flag and say, this person actually cheated and we have proof of it. And it will instantly update the wallet, but most importantly, it will update anybody that the person has shared this information with. So if I shared it with my employer's health and safety system and said, hey, or say an HRIS system like a Workday, and I've passed that information through from my wallet to them, now the employer knows that there's been a change in the person's capability to do that job. And that happened instantly because you, as the issuer, were able to verify that the information is no longer true. And you made that commitment to tell the world instantly that the information is no longer true. So this is absolutely a living, breathing environment that's propagated with more and more information. But this is where the individual can also control what information belongs to who and who can see what and how often. So for us in this world that we're moving into of what are now called verifiable credentials, it's creating an environment where the identity of the individual is owned by the individual. The identity of the credential is issued to just that individual, and it can't be reissued to somebody else.
So the issuer controls that you've met the standard, you received the credential, an issuer could revoke the credential. But as an individual, I own my own identity and my training record, my credit information, my personal information for tax purposes and stuff like that. So it's obvious how that's going to change some of the world. Can you tell us a little bit about your partnership with the government of Canada? And I don't know if you're allowed to talk about
for sure, absolutely.
Because I think what I see is this is affecting everybody. They may not know it yet. It's coming. It's going to affect all citizens in different ways. And we're just talking today about maybe credentials and the training applications of this, but what are you doing with the government of Canada?
So the Treasury Board in 2015 and 16 created a project that was going to look at the true ownership of the digital identity of an individual, where the person can truly become self-sovereign, where they can truly own their identity, and they can choose who can ping their identity for information. They can choose who they want to share this information with. The only relationship between the individual and that government body is that they issue that initial, kind of like how we get a SIM card issued to us when either we become permanent residents or we're born Canadians, we're issued this SIM card. It's like that. It's like being issued that one-time identity that you are who you say you are. And everybody can trust that that identity comes verified from the source, meaning in this case, the issuing body, so the government of Canada. So what the Treasury Board has done is created a project where a number of us participated in 2020 in creating the blue sky for how an identity will be owned by an individual, but also how a business, so imagine being an Alberta 123 Incorporated or any other provincial incorporated body, I also own my own business ID. So we're not talking about just an individual ID, but a business ID. And the future of that being issued once to you, and then you being able to use that for all business transactions. You being able to use that for walking into a convenience store at 7-Eleven, and instead of them asking you for proof of age, you can just share your credential with that system that's a trusted system. And all they need to know in that system is that you have a real ID and that it meets the proof of age requirement. But they don't need to see your height, eye color, weight, glasses, no glasses, any of that personal data that's truly my data. So the point here is that the government is looking to enable you. And when I say the government, I want to be very careful. I'm talking about specific bodies within the government that are moving towards this one digital identity that you get to own, you get to control, and you get to have it portable with you. So this means that if you were to go to Europe, the digital identity standards in Europe will be able to communicate with the digital identity standards in Canada or the US or other places. So walking into a shop in Europe and maybe having the same situation there of show me your proof of identity is going to be interrelated and interoperable. So I can prove to them with the same method that I did in Canada over there, and they can take it as a single source of truth. So, and that becomes incredibly powerful.
Having a business identity. So the as I understand digital identities, it can apply to a person, a business, a thing,
an asset, anything.
And that certainly makes sense. The perspective in the market of people who don't understand the difference between self-sovereignty and the government wanting to have digital identities for people. So the challenge will be to get people to understand, I think, that this isn't a centralization of data. And obviously the government is going to have to run a private blockchain for this. It wouldn't be on a decentralized ledger if you're the Treasury Board. So I guess my question is, how would you respond if somebody says, this is actually Big Brother? We're actually getting to this world where the government's watching you everywhere I go.
Well, here's a simple example. We've seen, and I don't need to name companies, but we've seen massive hacks right over the last 5 years. And as you know, as an organization, by regulatory requirements, I have to report any data breach, right? That would have not just a breach into the organization, but a breach specifically that deals with people's personal information, right? So imagine how many times your data has been breached, where you would have never been made aware of that data breach until the organization has publicly come out and said, your data has been breached. And what does breaching really mean? It means somebody basically took all of your personal information and is now using it for other purposes than what it was intended for. Well, what if the next time somebody was to have a data breach, when that identity that is to be taken, instead of it being in a simple database that somebody just kind of go copy paste or export out, that identity sits in a say in a framework where you would be pinged the moment your data is being touched by that organization. And you would be able to say, I am approving this company or this organization to have a transaction with me right now.
So does that mean
so it's
associations,
the security is incredible.
businesses, they just won't need to maintain that information internally anymore? So HR
100%.
departments don't need to keep, void checks or banking information or addresses. It will be shared by the employee, and
That's
will
right.
be revoked when it comes to turnover.
Yeah, so I mean, we recognize the fact that there's certain regulatory requirements that mandate an organization to keep certain components of a person's profile on file for say up to 7 years, right? And digital identity and And we have a series of purists in the self-sovereign identity, digital identity space that are saying that should never happen. But the reality is regulations like ISO regulations and others don't permit organizations to truly get rid of all the data. But what they can do is they can find ways to de-identify the data for that period of time and only allow access to that data, for example, for the purpose of an audit, right? Where you can say, prove to me that last year you had 22,000 employees and these employees were paid fairly, right? Is an example. But if that happened, then you as an individual are permitted to know about that instance or that transaction. But the future state basically also says, what if there's data that the company doesn't care to keep, right? So you mentioned a checking account information. The reality is, if you and I are done transacting with each other and I left your company, whether I choose to leave or you let me go, once you deposited that last check, why does that financial system still need to know my checking account information if you're no longer going to be depositing anything in there? Or there's no claims that are going to happen to the two of us. So certain data I should have the right to revoke, because now if this company has a data breach in their financial systems, somebody not only took my first name, my last name, but also my checking account information.
My social insurance number, et cetera. Yeah.
And they know everything about my family, and they know my spouse, and they know my kids, and they know my, beneficiaries, they know everything about me. In certain sets that companies are now saying, well, that's just toxic data to me. I don't need to own this information. That brings zero business value to me as an organization to own that data. So why own it when I don't need to own it?
So I can see that advantage now for an issuer. When I think about people that use our platform or ourselves when we issue training credentials, now I get the ability to revoke that credential.
Yeah.
If it is one that expires, then naturally it expires and then it's no longer valid. So it puts that employee or person in a position of non-compliance if they're continuing to practice and they're not compliant.
Right.
Trying to think for the customers that we have that are watching this or future customers. What are some real world examples? So I've used that example video 100 times with people about the gentleman in the back of the grocery store trying to start the baler to compact some cardboard. So it's a safety instance in that case. Training would normally be required, probably proof of training, proof of identity. But in the old way, it would have been, Bob starts, he comes to a training course, we write it and we put it in his file. And then maybe if it's an external provider of the credential, it might be a wallet card or a wall certificate or something like that. But what are some real world applications where we're going to see? And I know that this is going to change everything, how we log into stuff, how we access our own personal information or link our bank accounts. I'm really more thinking about it from a training context. So people the people who will benefit from our partnership.
Yeah.
What are we going to see in 2 years and 5 years that will be just the real world applications of this?
Well, let's take a simple example. You train a lot of health and safety professionals, right? And so let's take in Canada as an example. And I'm not talking about these organizations as being our clients or our partners today, but this is just a real life example we can link the information to. So imagine a health and safety professional in Canada that has to have a BCRSP designation. BCRSP also has deals with different brokers of insurance. But in order for you to be able to have that insurance, say like ProLink, being able to have an insurance for ProLink, you have to prove that you have a BCRSP designation. ProLink needs to know that in order to give you the discount that they've negotiated with BCRSP. Now, imagine if now is the individual that has to have a BCRSP designation and the ProLink insurance. When I show up to work, what if I got that job and I decided to cancel my ProLink insurance? What happens then? The employer doesn't know because I haven't been a good actor and told the employer that I've done that. But I choose to not want to pay the fees for the remainder of the year. So I'm going to reinstate my ProLink insurance in 11 months from now when I'm due for my next, say, internal audit to make sure that I as an individual are meeting my requirements. Now, those are just two assets of a person's profile to work. But should I, without all of my continuous training, all of my 30 hours of continuous learning or anything like that, should I be able to, for example, sign off on a core audit inside my company if I don't have everything in good standing to put my name on our company's public record of a core audit that then ultimately impacts my, say, ESG reportability, right?
So you can build a compliance framework for an individual. So a training matrix of 10 things they have to have. That's right. And they're compliant. And then it could be a project, which is a group of individuals, which might include an insurance coverage. And ultimately, your software will track this compliance framework is customized for your customer's needs.
Yeah.
And then we're going to issue credentials as a training, and we're no longer sending digital badges your way, right? We're publishing our credentials to the new standard, which sits out right here, and then we're not sending you information either. We're both pinging the same source of information, us as an issuer and you as a verifier. Okay.
And we basically become just a conduit, right? Like we just become the rails of verification and communication between, in this case, the insurance provider, the association, the training body, the individual, and the employer. So now everybody, that goes back to working off of a single source of truth. Everybody's working off of a single source of truth because everybody is communicating back to that wallet. But yet in between, everybody's communicating with each other, right? So BCRSP is communicating with ProLink with BCRSP in order for them to agree that the person can have the discount or to has the designation. But if I'm now BCRSP and I say I suspend somebody's designation because they haven't paid their membership dues or they haven't done their continuous learning, should I still benefit from that ProLink discount? The answer is probably no, because I failed at completing my commitment to BCRSP. Should my employer allow me to do certain jobs within my organization until I get back up in good standing? The answer is no, because I'm now a profiled risk to the organization, and I'm no longer meeting my hiring requirements. But then if I have all these other designations that I need to meet through, say, the Reno training group of companies or profiles, how do I make sure that those designations are still, or credentials are still being kept in good standing? So there should be a notification system that happens from my wallet back to Reno training, say, hey, I'm scheduled to still be on this kind of a job in this kind of environment in 30 days from now. Can you please pre-book me into a course?
So if I was to say the old status quo was, wallet cards and wall certificates.
Yeah.
That's very analog, understood. We've done that for 90 or 100 years. And then there was digital badges, which, based on certain frameworks, I could issue a digital credential that could expire. I believe it would be, referenceable in terms of I could keep it up or down real time in terms of revoking the status.
Yeah.
And I get to where my technical understanding ends. What you're talking about is an interoperability system for the world,
Yes.
which is that it won't just be training, but it'll also be personal information and credentials. So just to wrap up and this is a very technical conversation, and not this alone, but the topic. W3C, you encouraged me to, I've read as best as I can as a non-engineer programmer, I've read both standards for a DID, a digital ID, and then the published standard that they just published for a verified credential. So what would you tell people who are watching this, they want to learn it, they're maybe not, functioning at your level of, technical understanding, but how would you describe that standard, where they could research more, and, I guess in general terms, how it's going to affect them?
I think that the best way to look at it, so W3C stands for the World Wide Web Consortium. And the World Wide Web Consortium was created many moons ago to ultimately control the way that information is passed through the internet and how people can consume that information. And as many of us remember, even 10 years ago or 8 years ago, we used to ultimately go into building a product. And in that product, we used to go out and say, it needs to meet these web browser profiles, right? So I would have to build that product and ask you as a company or as a client, are you using Internet Explorer as your organization? Do you use Mozilla? What do you use? Because my product and my HTML code had to fit that specific framework. And that's how I could sell to you as an organization. Now, W3C came out about 10 years ago and said, no more of building for different web browser types. We're all going to build for one browser profile. So you code once and it displays the same in everything. They've taken that same model now and said, the world of digital identity has proliferated to everything has an identity. An asset has an identity, a truck, a person, a business, everything has an identity. And that identity is most likely going to be internet published at some point, because we have this world of interconnectivity, right? You think about a truck and logbooks in a truck. Well, we already know that that asset, meaning the truck and its logbooks, have been digitized, right? And we can respect the fact that the logbook is associated to this truck only, not to any other truck, because I can't move my logbook from truck to truck to truck. So the reality is that the W3C had to come in and create a new standard and say the new standard of how we present and consume digital identity on the internet is going to be written this one specifically. And all the major organizations, we're talking about Apple, Google, Microsoft, all the major players in the world had to come together and provide their feedback as to the standard. And when the standard got created and it got approved actually a few months ago, it's been in the works for years, but it got approved a few months ago. It dictates the way that we now officially communicate between systems. And on the internet, how do we communicate an identity? So verifiable credentials is not going anywhere. If anything, it will be embedded into every single piece of identity. If anything's been digitized, it will have a verifiable credential added to it. So it's just going to happen. And the beauty of it is that this is built in a way and is going to be consumed in a way in which I control it. I own that information. I get to log in on a website with my verifiable credential. I'll log in
Unless
into
an
a
issuer revokes. So unless you no longer comply, and then now it puts control of the issuer to revoke that, and in real time you've lost that.
Yeah, and I think it's about the identity of multiple things. It's my personal identity of logging into my e-track account, but it's also my personal identity to log into my health and safety system or log into my issuer system. So the issuer actually knows that I am a real individual before I sign up for my course. So then when my course credit gets issued to me, it's only issued to me and to nobody else. So it becomes non-transferable. And that is incredible.
And I've thought about the effect of our business on becoming we want to issue verified credentials based on the new standard. And now with our partnership with you, we're doing that. But then I think about upstream to go, the role of the identity in our platform.
100%.
Logons, APIs, all those things go away with this. So it's going to be fascinating. I want to just bring up a couple examples, and I think maybe take a chance to go to some questions.
Yeah, 100%.
I think when I first talked to you, everyone's familiar with the Apple Wallet. If you have an Apple phone, I'm sure there's an Android version of this. And then I thought, well, it's all going to be here. And then I realized, as I'm learning, this is what Apple does for me. It provides me this, and then, but then we're on Microsoft Shop here, and so. And I noticed just in the last month to 2 months as we got to know each other, this little thing called Verifier ID, and now I click on that, and this is going to be, now of course this ecosystem is controlled through our employer, my employer, our company, and Active Directory and Microsoft, and I know you're working with Microsoft. We were just in Seattle to talk about this, and so every employer or every issuer, or sorry, not issuer, I guess it would be an association or a member-based organization, a company, can have their own private kind of wallets. But it's the standard that it talks to all the other wallets, and the credentials and IDs are standardized. So so if I'm that 16-year-old kid and I've just taken my hunter education, and a fish and wildlife officer comes out into the field, now we can just tap phones and they're going to know immediately if I've been trained, if I'm who I say I am, if I've been trained and I met the standard. And if it currently is compliant. Correct?
Well, and that's exactly it. So I don't know if we're going to play bump phones yet, but it is definitely that component of when they look at it or they read it, they'll be able to see that in real time, that credential is still active. And they can trust the source issuer because you couldn't have received it unless you were connected to them. And they've verified you as an individual. And that's how they issued it to you. So the new model of trust is absolutely incredible. However, can I create a unique link and send it to the officer and say, hey, here's my information as you requested it, and they can see the traceability of where that information came from, and they can trust the end source 100%.
So that's the same as a real estate agent. That would be a financial wealth planner.
Yeah.
Obviously, health and safety. There's endless examples of proof of training and the trust. So I think it's fascinating. I think you can just imagine where it's going to go, and I think what I feel is especially with the recently approved and published standards, and knowing that all of the major players in the world are now playing on the same, singing from the same song sheet, using the same words, building their solutions to the same standard. I'm excited because, we are going to future-proof our offering for our customers and our partners and our learners. So, we have learners, they're going to have future-proof credentials that will work in the new world, and we'll have platform partners who need this, because they want to be a trusted issuer, and they want it to be in the new framework, compliant with the new standard. And our partnership, I think for the folks that are with us today, and is exciting because we want to introduce you to as many of our people that buy training from us, companies, a lot of construction and health and safety, derived customers, but also associations, regulators, credentialing bodies, and government. I think this is a fascinating thing. I know now we'll perhaps take any questions if we have them, unless there's anything you want to add here before we kind of jump into questions.
I think there's a question up here that came up. So tell us more about the portability of digital credentials. How do I carry them from job to job? So I think, Chris, this goes exactly to what you just mentioned right now, which is this having this concept of a web wallet, right? And a web wallet is what we've designed our product in, which means that it's accessible on a desktop, it's accessible on a mobile device, but it's accessible from anywhere, anytime. That's the intent behind it. And because that web wallet is tied to my identity, I can, let's say I lose my device, I can always go back and revoke that identity and reissue it to myself, because I can prove that I am that individual that earned that. And this web wallet, even though it's issued by an employer today to their workforce, it becomes a portable digital wallet, which means that I can take this with me from job to job to job. So going back to your 2012 example, imagine how successful it would have been if an individual could have just taken that persona and they could have gone from any one of the Suncors and Shells and Exxon Mobils of the world, and entered that job site within, hopefully in the future, say minutes, because they've been pre-approved, they're pre-qualified, and they're competent to do the job that they were originally trained for. Because the one thing we can't take away from people is their training. Once you've learned something, you can't just unlearn it because the organization paid for it, right? But you can take it with you, and sure, there's certain credentials that are non-portable, right? But those credentials can be just labeled as suspended or no longer in good standing, but they can't be technically revoked and say, you've never learned this, you can't unlearn it. So now this web wallet component becomes my digital identity, my proof of having been employed before, and my proof of going from company to company to company. And this means that the onboarding process of a new company will be that much shorter. The ability for them to trust the identity. So think about Microsoft and Active Directory. When I go into an organization, they issue me an Active Directory ID that allows me to have access to certain systems. Now, what if I took that and I had that as a portable identity factor with me to prove that the previous company had maybe done a background check on me, a criminal check, an identity check. They've already verified that I'm a real individual. So how much simpler is it going to be for the next employer to trust me that I'm ready to work and that I am who I say that I am? So that portable digital identity component is really very much about supporting the consumers and supporting something that I like to call an employee-employer relationship. Because now it's a relationship of trust. And we trust that I can't do something internally without you and I both knowing that I should be able to do that internally.
Makes sense. Another question, as a trusted training provider, tell me more about the trust relation digital credentials help you build with your customers. It's ultimately their whole business. It's their whole, generally, when we think about our platform partners, people who use our technology to run their credentialing programs, it's either maybe regulated or credentialed or an association with a designation. Their ultimate product is the proof of competency, and that's we build all of our training around it. We want to basically empower people to ultimately be successful in what they're hoping to achieve. But our customer's role is either to act in the role of protecting the public interest, or protecting their designation, and so we work with, the CFP designation. And we're partners with FP Canada, and the CFP designation sets a standard to be a certified financial planner in this country. And so really that's their entire objective, is the integrity of that designation means that that person will practice and operate in that business at a much higher standard than if they hadn't taken that training. So, for all of our partner clients, people that use our platform, this is just a way for them to issue that proof first with a significantly more validity that the person is who they say, because we're verifying them when we onboard them. The future of digital identity is going to really change that, because we won't even have to verify them. They'll walk in with their digital identity. We'll educate them, or our partner will educate them to a new standard. And now they'll know when that standard's displayed in the market, that person meets the standard. And that's ultimately the role of our customers are, credentialing organizations, licensure organizations. So, the Hunter Education example that I've used, we do the alcohol server and cannabis retail worker training for the province of British Columbia. Well, the action is to train people, but the objective is to have a well-trained person who understands that, so when they go practice in industry, they're safer, or they create a safer environment. Well, where it breaks down is the proof and the trust, and the prevalence of counterfeited wallet cards, or like in the United States, there's 60 Minutes episodes about people counterfeiting their OSHA cards. So for our partners and customers, and even for where we issue credentials, it's just going to eliminate so much uncertainty about if that person is actually who they say they are, and they know what they say they know, and then that remains current. So we have a lot of partners that have a recurrency requirement in their industry, and that's an important part of virtually every profession. So both industry, trade, and professional, generally there's a recurrency of knowledge, and so this just gives a way for that maintenance of competency. So for our customers, I think it's going to make a huge difference.
I think there's one other component in there that's really interesting for me, which is the aspect of portability and ownership, right? And I can change. Let's say I'm mortgage brokers. If I change mortgage brokers, professional groups that I work with, having that portable digital credential with me that proves to my next employer that I'm already pre-qualified and certified to go there, and they can just trust me that I'm in good standing, because what they see as live is important to the hiring manager to just know, yeah, okay, you've just checked my off. And knowing that they've come from the issuer that's actually designated them is even stronger of a proof, because it's not just the association saying you've got a credential, but it's also all the learning that you took. Because now I can take the course names, for example, with me and say, I'm proficient in these 10 things.
And I think from an employer perspective, that makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah.
But, I want to add the public, the society and public, protection aspect of if I want to choose a real estate agent, a realtor, we opened a new real estate school in Alberta. And I'm going to choose a realtor to help me. They're going to be in my home. It's a very personal, private thing. I just want some way to know, as a member of the public, that this person's meeting that standard, which is essentially why it's a regulated industry in the first place. Ride share drivers, we're exploring and working on a ride share driver, credentialing program, and those things are where the public interacts with professions or trades or industry. I think there's also a public trust thing that can be really vastly improved. So I see another question here in terms of this might be better for you, Dan, but how can I as a professional own my credential? Maybe we've kind of answered that.
Yeah.
One here is, how can you verify learners to make sure the right person is taking the course before the credential is issued? That's great. So there's the current way. So again, this is the revelation I'm having just last weekend walking my dog. It's like, okay, we have folks log on. We have a 2-factor authentication for them. So, email, mobile, and then when they start, that's to create an account on our platform. And then when they start their course, some of our courses have what we call Learner Verified turned on, which is essentially the ability for us to, the web camera turns on, and now all of a sudden we are recording their ID. So we'll match their ID. We'll And then we'll stay with them throughout their learning. So this is part of our platform that allows us to essentially monitor someone throughout the program. It doesn't matter if it's a 2-hour program or if it's our real estate course is 160 hours, because it's an AI tool. It's not a person that's watching.
Yeah.
It. And the AI tool will flag anomalies. But so once we've kind of got that onboarding into the platform, we have the government issued ID verification. We're fairly confident that this is who they say they are. And then we issue a credential, and now the credential is proof that they met the standard. So that's the pass or fail, and the digital badge, which is now a verified credential. But what I think is going to happen, what it just occurred to me over the weekend, and I go back to my product development team, is digital identities are going to show up, and they're not going to want to log in. Their digital identity they share with us will establish who they are.
That's right.
And that'll allow them to potentially create a profile on our platform and eventually take training, and then that identity will be linked to that credential. So I think it's all very fascinating. I don't think people can predict what's going to happen in the world, but yeah, it'll be fun to watch. How many credentials has We Know Training issued over the years? What type of training provided, which industries? You know, the number is hard to say. I know it's at least 500 to 700,000 a year in terms of credentials equals course completions and digital badges. So, you know, there's
And you've been in business for how long?
very high, well, since 2006, really. And so, you know, we didn't
That's
digital
a lot of
digital
years.
badges, but there's a lot of old wallet cards. There's actually some wall certificates back in the day from some of our stuff, but millions of credentials we've issued in probably 20 different various types of industries. So everything from real estate to financial planning, insurance, security guard training, to obviously a ton of health and safety, real estate licensing, and Canadian nurses. We partner with associations. That's a big part of our business. So nurses. So, you know, I think that's what I'm most excited about here is that each of those has this kind of walled garden standard in terms of their credential.
Yeah.
And they have to protect what it means to be competent in that space. That I understand. But the credential itself should be, you know, universal, and to be able to exist in a universal ecosystem, so a person in the public can see it, an employer, maybe a police officer, you know, whatever. Obviously, with the border control, eventually these things will all be part of our digital identities. So that's what we do, and super excited to partner with Credivera, who helps our customers and our partners and customers essentially build their compliance frameworks. Would that be a good way to describe it? 100%. Track and manage their compliance frameworks, both from small companies like in construction, small construction companies, all the way up to the government of Canada.
Yeah.
Am I missing something in there?
No, we've got that and everything in between.
Right.
Absolutely.
Good stuff.
Phenomenal.
I don't think we have any more questions. So thanks,
Well,
Dan. I
thank you.
appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It was a lot of fun.
It's fantastic.
And just, I guess, if folks want to get a hold of Credivera, of course, it's credivera.ca or .com.
Credivera.com.
Credivera.com. And of course, reach out to We Know Training if you're a We Know Training customer or partner today, or directly to Credivera. We will happily joint present this solution to any of our customers or future customers or partners.
100%.
So
Yeah, very
thanks so
excited.
much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us.